Hi everyone. Today we're going to make a little bit more of a, not complicated, but more complex dal, I guess. Ironically, even though this dal has fewer spices that I'm going to be using for it, it does have more ingredients. That's garlic, that's ginger, that's curry leaves, and that's tomato. I'm using about a half a cup of moong dal and about 2 cups of water, give or take. You might need more or less, but I'm just you know, we're not going to dump all the water in at once. We might have to reserve some for later. So, stick with me. I'll show you the technique. It's fairly straightforward. We're going to be using some oil, some salt, and some cumin seeds. All the rest of the spices in there are pretty much going to stay out of this one. Reason being is that because I've got all these other flavors going on, I don't want a ton of spices getting in the way and sort of overpowering the flavor of the ginger and the garlic, the curry leaves and the rest of it. It's a slightly longer process than is the basic Daal Tarka I taught you last time, where, we just need some oil, some spices, a can of beans, and call it a night. This time we're using dried, split, hulled mung beans. You can use any kind of split lentil you want. The easiest to find in the US, wherever I've been, is red lentils. So depending on where you are, you might have an easier time finding red lentils than you would the moong dal. But you use what you have. Use what you have. I like the moong dal because it is fairly relatively quick cooking. So as you can see, we threw some oil in there. If indeed you want to make this oil free, go ahead and omit the oil and just dry toast the cumin seed before you throw in the aromatics, and then add some water to sort of cook them all together. But I do like the oil in there, so I'm going to add some. But I know some of you have been asking me, like, can I make this oil free? Yes, absolutely you can. And in goes the cumin seed. And as you can hear, they're already starting to crack and pop. That's because I cheated and had the pan preheated, because this does go relatively quick. Then in with the curry leaves. They smell lovely. And then we're going to add some of the ginger. And we're going to add about half the garlic, not all of it. Reason being is that I'm going to add my garlic in 2 batches. I'm going to add the first batch to just fry in the oil for a little bit. And then I'm going to add the second batch towards the end so that I get a boost of the garlic flavor. Now that everything's sort of cooked down a bit, we're just going to dump in our tomatoes. And this is going to get a little awkward because I'm going one-handed. Yay, I managed it. Okay. So let's use a wooden spoon here, turn that around a bit. So basically, we're just trying to get the tomatoes cooked down. This is the reason why I tend to prefer to use fresh tomatoes over the canned ones. See, as you can see, I washed my dishes, everything's neat. So once they're all dried out, I'm going to put them away. We're just getting a spoon rest for my guy here. But so the reason I'm not using canned tomatoes is that the canned tomatoes don't tend to break down as nicely as the fresh ones do. So for that reason, I'm using the fresh tomatoes. But if all you have is the canned tomato, what I will recommend that you do is you try to find one that does not have calcium chloride added to it, because the calcium chloride is added to it to prevent the tomatoes from breaking down. So these are just going to hang out in there for a bit, and they're actually going fairly quickly. So as you can see, and you can probably hear too, they sound like they're sizzling really loudly, and that's kind of what you're looking for. You want them to, you want them to break down. Mind you, they will continue to break down as it cooks, so I don't necessarily need them to be a gravy at this point. Although I could well take them all the way down to gravy if I felt like it, but I do want them broken down. I want them to release some of their juices. But you can see, like, since they're fresh tomatoes and it's a very small quantity, they're cooking down extremely quickly. They're not staying in big whole, chunky pieces, which, I don't want in my dal. I want them to be broken down a bit. So now that those are pretty much where I want them, let me show you closer. See how that looks? So they're not whole, they're just in chunks. I'm gonna go ahead and add my moong dal and about 1.5 cups of the water. I'm just gonna reserve the rest of it in case I need it for if the water goes down too much. Oh, a little bit more. There we go. It's about 1.5 cups. You don't have to be exactly precise with these measurements. I'm kind of eyeball measuring it. I did measure out the water ahead of time, just for those of you taking notes at home, so that you'll have the measurements if you need them. But by and large, you can just generally eyeball this, and you should be fine. I am on high heat. I've been actually working on high heat this entire time. So just gonna wait for this to come to a boil, and I'm not going to walk away from it. Reason being, moong dal is one of those lentils which will overflow in the pan while it's cooking. So rather than take a risk on it, overflowing on me, I'm just adding some salt there. Rather than risk it, puffing up and making a giant mess on my nice clean stove, I'm going to keep a close eye on this sucker until it starts boiling. Then I'm going to drop down the heat to low and kind of just let it park for about 15 minutes to 20 minutes, depending on how done I want my dal. Now, the other thing I'm going to do in the meanwhile is I'm going to take that extra water that I have, that last half cup, and I'm going to boil it in the microwave and get it nice and hot, so that in case I do need to add more water to this pot, I can add the hot water and not have to worry about the temperature of the whole pot coming down. So as you can see, there's bubbles coming up on the surface of the dal. I want a full rushing boil before I drop this down to a lower heat, and that's going to happen fairly quickly. As you can see, we've been going from start to finish. We've barely passed the 8-minute mark, just past the 7-minute mark, and we've already got the dal in there in soup form already. So pretty much from this time on, especially if you've seasoned it just now like I have, and you're seasoning as you go. I'm just gonna grab a towel so I can clean up after myself when I'm making splashy messes. I don't like things messy. I like things tidy. So this is fairly quick. Like, getting it going is the longest part. Getting the spices in, getting the ingredients chopped, all that other stuff. That's your preparation-y stuff that you have to do that takes the longest, and that's why it does take considerably more time than the Daal Tarka, which is, open up a can of beans, throw in some spices, call it a night. Like, this does take a little bit more time, but the beauty of it is that you don't have to spend any time at all during the end of the cooking. So, like, if you get this started, let's say about a minute or two after you've put on your pot of rice, you can generally have it ready fairly quickly, and they get done around the same time. So there's a little tip for you guys. So I'm going to see, we have a nice happy rushing boil, big bubbles breaking the surface. So I'm going to drop this down to low heat, to as low as my stove will go. I'm going to put on a lid, and I'm just going to let this kind of park for about 12 to 15 minutes, depending on how done. I'm also going to wait for this to come down from the big screaming rushing boil, because I've also learned the hard way. Sometimes the stove doesn't really respond, or I forgot to turn it down, and I walk away, and then 15 minutes later the thing is, a mess. So I'm going to wait for it to come to that rushing boil and then come down a bit, and then we'll go off on break, and I'll come back and tell you how long it took. Alright, so this is about where we want to be. So the stove is as low as it's going to go. I'm just going to put the lid on there so it doesn't lose too much water. Meanwhile, I'm going to compile the rest of that garlic that I've got left in the pan and get it ready to throw in at the last couple of minutes. I'm going to boil my water, and I'm going to clean up a little bit of the mess that I've made, so that when it's time to eat, I can just eat. Alright, see you soon. Alright, so we're at the 10-minute mark, and as you can see, some of the dal has started to swell. It's gotten bigger. It is technically cooked all the way through, because if I zoom in a bit here, Let's take a look at these guys. See if that camera wants to focus. There we go. They've gone from opaque to translucent, so they are technically cooked, but they're not cooked enough for my liking. I prefer it when the dal is cooked a little bit more thoroughly than this. And I'm kind of happy with where the water level is at right now, although I do have some hot water here for adjusting this guy if I need to. Maybe I will add just a teensy bit because I don't want it to be dry. I want it to have some, liquidness to it. Anyway, I added a little bit of water. There's still another quarter cup or so of water left in the cup. So a couple of splashes. It seems to have made a nice difference, so I'm pleased. It has not been at low heat all this time. I turned the stove up to like a 1 because it wasn't bubbling enough for the job to get done. Now that the dal is cooked, I'm going to add my second dose of garlic so that I can have some of that sharpness of fresh garlic as well as the cooked garlic that's gone in during the beginning. So this is all going to cook for I'm going to give it another 5 minutes because I think it can take it. It doesn't seem to be falling apart on me, so I should be fine. So I'm going to crank this up to like a 3 or so and kind of let it park. I guess I'd call it a 2.5. Okay. My stove doesn't have temperature. It has a scale of 1 to 10, so I gave it up, bumped it up to 3.5 on that scale. And I also gave my wall a bit of a scrub because at the beginning of the video, I didn't realize until it was too late that the wall was looking gross. So this is going to go for another 5 minutes and we're going to come back. Alrighty, so we are here at the 15-minute mark, and you can see that some of the lentils are starting to fall apart, kind of get squishy at the edges. This is about where I like my dal to be at. There are times when I have cooked the dal ahead of time in the pressure cooker, and it comes out as a complete puree. I like that one as well. My nephew and niece prefer it that way. They like theirs to be almost unrecognizable as a bean. They just want it to be like this gravy almost type of thing. So, but if I've gone to the trouble of cooking it on the stovetop, I will tend to stop when it's cooked all the way through and like I can squish it easily with a finger, but not so cooked that, it's a mush. Just tasted it for salt and garlic. Its flavors tremendously nice. And I think the beauty of this recipe is that if you don't have all those hundreds of spices that I have at my disposal, you can really just do this with cumin seeds and it will do the job. In fact, this one's a lot easier to customize versus the one that I normally make. If you don't have curry leaves, feel free to throw in some basil leaves at the end, to give it some flavor, especially since you're adding tomato. Basil and tomato go together really great. Even if you do have curry leaves, feel free to add the basil or cilantro as you wish. Either or is fine. If you feel like adding some onions in place of the garlic and the ginger, you're welcome to do that. If you don't have ginger, just use garlic. If you have no garlic but you have onion, go ahead and just use that. Any combination of aromatics is fine. But this is the kind I like. It's fairly simple, but it does take a little bit longer than your basic Daal Tarka, which is less than 5 minutes. This guy took closer to 20 minutes, but of that 20 minutes, only about 5 or 6 minutes was active time standing there in the kitchen and actually doing anything. Once you've got the pot going, you pretty much go about your merry way and do your thing. So hope you guys give this one a shot. This one's actually a little less complicated than the Daal Tarka, but it does involve a little bit longer in cooking time. What you can do if you want to cheat is do this version with the garlic and the ginger and the whatnot and the tomato, and actually just add a can of beans to it. That is a perfectly valid way of making dal as well. You don't have to necessarily cook it all from scratch like I have. I just had moong dal lying around, and I wanted to have some moong dal tonight with my rice. So I chose to make it. But if you have cans of beans and you want to do a quickie, the spices and the tomatoes take very little time, and then add the can of beans, let it come to a full rushing boil, and kind of let it park for about 5 minutes, so that all the spices and the garlic and everything else has has enough time to cook all the way through. And then shut off the heat and you're done. That's it. Like this is a fairly straightforward recipe. If you would like to expand this out into a soup, you are more than welcome to add a bunch of chopped vegetables and finish it with some coconut milk, and it would be perfectly delicious. Because this base has a ton of flavor. There's lots of garlic. There's lots of ginger. There's plenty of cumin seeds. This is a nice base to start at. If you want like a quickie soup out of your way, and you don't really feel like going through the effort of making or buying stock, and you just want like a flavorful base, this one will get it for you. So feel free to experiment. Let me know how it turns out, and I hope to see you next time. Take care. Bye.